The room was alive with laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the low hum of classical music. Everything about the evening shimmered with perfection: the lighting, the soft gold decor, the sea of designer dresses and tailored suits. It was the kind of night meant to celebrate love, success, and a picture-perfect marriage. At least that's what everyone thought. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice rang out deep and commanding enough to quiet the room. My husband, Ethan Langford, stood at the head of the table, smiling like a man on top of the world. He looked every bit the confident, charming entrepreneur everyone adored. His navy suit was flawless, his tie precisely knotted, his posture radiating control. But I knew better. That smile was rehearsed, just like everything else about him. We were celebrating 11 years of marriage, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues at one of Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop restaurants. But the sparkle in his eyes wasn't joy. It was something else, something calculated. I slowly set my wine glass down, my fingers still resting on the stem as Ethan held up a thick, cream-colored envelope. My stomach tightened, though my face remained serene. Around the table, conversations faded into an expectant hush. I could almost feel the collective anticipation hovering in the air. Ethan cleared his throat dramatically. "Tonight marks 11 incredible years together," he began, flashing me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But sometimes, even after so much time, you realize people grow in different directions. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. His voice carried easily, deliberate, and smooth, every word crafted for impact. He turned to me. "Sophia," he said softly, almost tenderly, "I've met someone who truly understands me. I think it's time we go our separate ways." The words hung there, heavy, surreal, cruel. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. I could hear nothing but the slow thud of my heart. Then came the murmurs, the gasps, the discreet clicks of phones recording what was clearly about to become a public scandal. Ethan, of course, was basking in it. He thrived on attention, especially the kind that made him look powerful. Slowly, he placed the envelope on the table and slid it toward me, the faint smirk never leaving his lips. "Divorce papers," he said simply. "Right here, right now." I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. My gaze lingered on his smug expression, on the way his shoulders relaxed as if he had already won. He expected tears, begging, maybe even a dramatic exit. He wanted to see me break in front of everyone. But what he didn't know was that I had seen this coming months ago. I picked up my wine again, letting the ruby-red liquid swirl in the glass as I tilted it toward the light. The silence around us thickened. He was waiting for my reaction, but I gave him none. Instead, I smiled. A soft, knowing smile that made the whispers stop. That made him pause. "How interesting," I said calmly, my voice steady as stone. I took my time opening the envelope, flipping through the crisp pages without a hint of panic. Then I looked up, meeting his gaze with an expression so composed it made him flinch. "You really thought I didn't know?" The flicker of uncertainty that crossed his face was everything I'd hoped for. It was quick, but it was there. For the first time that evening, Ethan Langford, the man who prided himself on being untouchable, was caught off guard. I leaned back, letting the papers rest on the table. My tone was casual, almost amused. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? The late-night meetings, the secret trips, the unexplained charges on our joint card." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Sophia, this isn't the place." "Oh, but you chose the place, darling," I interrupted softly, my words slicing through his composure like glass. "You wanted an audience, didn't you?" The guest shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or escape. But Ethan's ego wouldn't let him back down. "I just want to do this the right way," he said, forcing his voice to sound calm. "We'll split things fairly." I almost laughed. The right way? Fairly? The audacity of it made my skin prickle with amusement. "You mean you want half of everything I built?" I replied, folding my hands neatly in my lap. His eyes narrowed. "We built this life together, Sophia. You wouldn't be where you are without me." And there it was, the arrogance that had defined our marriage. The belief that every success I'd achieved, every late night, every risk I took, somehow belonged to him. I tilted my head, a faint smirk tugging at my lips. You might want to rethink that statement. 6 months ago, I had started preparing for this moment. Every suspicious phone call, every hidden charge, Every shift in his schedule had told me exactly what I needed to know. I'd spent those months quietly moving my assets, transferring funds, changing business ownership structures, and collecting proof. Because if Ethan wanted war, I would make sure I was the one writing the ending. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my own envelope, identical to his. The sound of it sliding across the polished table was sharp and deliberate. Ethan's brow furrowed as he hesitated before picking it up. "What's this?" "Open it," I said, my tone deceptively pleasant. He did, and within seconds, the color drained from his face. Inside were photographs, receipts, and printed messages. Every piece of evidence documenting his affair and financial betrayal. Lavish hotel stays under fake names, expensive dinners charged to our accounts, transfers to a woman named Lena Torres, a 21-year-old yoga instructor from his gym. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. Around us, the whispers grew louder. His facade was cracking. How did you even— "Oh, come on, Ethan." I leaned forward, my voice dropping just enough for only him to hear. "You really think you could fool me? You can't hide anything from a woman who's already stopped loving you." He swallowed hard, his confidence evaporating with every passing second. The game had shifted. "You wanted to humiliate me," I continued, my tone calm and surgical. "But you walked straight into your own trap." He stared at the evidence, his once proud posture now wilted. "We don't have to do this here," he whispered through clenched teeth. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "But you wanted a spectacle, remember? Let's not deprive your audience." A ripple of awkward laughter spread among the guests, unsure whether to stay or pretend they weren't witnessing a public collapse. Ethan's nostrils flared as he tried to salvage his dignity. "You're not getting away with this," he muttered, his voice trembling slightly. "Oh, Ethan," I said softly, my eyes locked on his. "I already have." I picked up my phone and tapped the screen a few times before holding it up so he could see the email displayed. "Your access to our joint accounts? Revoked. The credit cards you've been using for your secret getaways? Frozen. The Miami apartment you rented for your little vacation?" I paused, savoring his growing panic. "Cancelled." The color drained completely from his face. For the first time, Ethan Langford, the man who thought he controlled everything, looked utterly powerless. And I wasn't done yet. I watched his face drain the color from it as the email glowed on my phone like a verdict. Around the table, the hum of whispers turned into a tangible tide, people nudging each other, mouths forming silent questions. Ethan's fingers curled into the papers. For a moment, he looked like a man trying to hold himself together with sheer will. Then his hand slid from the documents and trembled at his side. "You think this ends here?" he spat, voice low and dangerous. But it was hollow. The danger in him had been bled dry by exposure. As I rose to leave, the manager's courtesy became a public announcement. "Mrs. Langford?" he said, voice careful, eyes skirting Ethan. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but Mr. Langford's card has been declined." The words landed like an accusation. Ethan's jaw worked as if he could grind his way back to dignity, but there was nothing to bite on. I stepped into the cool night with the satisfaction of someone who had closed a long simmering circuit. The town car smelled faintly of leather and rain. I let the chauffeur close the door and leaned back, phone buzzing with incoming messages I planned to answer later. Lena's name lit the screen, missed calls, and one urgent text. "Where are you? He won't answer." I could have let her panic. Instead, I did what any strategist would. I sent her the screenshots. It took less than a minute. Read, typing. Then another screenshot, another proof. The file I'd forwarded, hotel reservations, a string of Venmo transfers, photos of late-night dinners with 2 place settings. The message bubble stilled at red. Then the call came. I let it ring 4 times, then let it go to voicemail. Let her feel the uncertainty. Let her realize that she had been handed a fantasy built on someone else's lies. By morning, the world had rearranged itself. My inbox was a mosaic of shocked friends, supportive colleagues, and a small army of people who'd been at the rooftop restaurant asking what on earth had happened. Natalie, my lawyer, sent a curt note. "Emergency hearing scheduled Monday. Gather any correspondence you have. Do not engage publicly. I'll file for an immediate freeze on joint assets." Her competence steadied me like a hand on the small of my back. Ethan's first move was predictable and petty. He texted me that afternoon. 2 words. You'll regret. I forwarded it to Natalie and poured another cup of coffee. There was something almost tender in his pettiness now, as if he believed that threats could stitch him back into respectability. He didn't understand the currency of proof. Word travels fast when it's scandal dressed as theater. Amanda, Ethan's sister, sent a long voice message that I listened to twice. She sounded exhausted, as if her world had been shuffled and re-examined mid-shuffle. "I'm so sorry, Soph," she said finally. "I believed him. I didn't want to. I thought her apology was a small, bright thing. It meant nothing to me in restitution, but it mattered for perspective. People change their tune when the facts are laid out like a table of evidence you can't ignore." Natalie moved like a chess master. She filed the emergency petition, attached the forensic bank statements we had compiled, and demanded an immediate asset freeze. Within hours, the bank had locked the joint accounts. Ethan called repeatedly, once, twice, a dozen times, but calls that used to find a quick reply now hit voicemail and then silence. His tone-shifting performances were no match for documents stamped and notarized. Monday in court felt like stepping into a cathedral of accountability. I walked through the courthouse doors with my coat held tight, my breath making small clouds in the cold air. Ethan was there, smaller somehow, the suit hanging at awkward angles, the arrogance smoothed off like a cheap finish. His lawyer glanced at him like someone who'd been called in on short notice to fix a car that had exploded. The hearing itself was perfunctory once Natalie laid out the timeline. She spoke crisply, almost conversationally, and the judge listened like someone who'd heard too many human dramas, but not one with such neat, damning records. "Mr. Langford," the judge said, looking down over his glasses, "you've been accused of deliberate financial misconduct in text messages and bank transfers. Do you have anything to say that would justify this behavior?" Ethan's mouth opened. His practiced retorts stalled shy of credibility. He began, then stopped. He was reduced to pleading for something he no longer possessed: trust. The judge didn't grant miracles. He granted relief, a freeze on joint assets, an order that any funds moved without authorization be returned, and for good measure, a warning that misuse could lead to criminal referrals. The ruling was steel-clad and fast. Outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered, shallow flashes and softer pens. A tabloid photographer tried to call out. I ignored him. It was tempting to speak, to make grand proclamations, but there's a particular power in silence after truth does all the talking. Ethan left the courthouse in a flurry of brisk steps, shoulders drawn, face pale. For the first time since we'd met, his walk did not command the room. The fallout was not theatrical so much as systematic. The university where Ethan taught quietly began disciplinary proceedings when academic colleagues brought the matter to the administration's attention. A donor withdrew support. Social invitations dried up. People who had once flattered him now created a perimeter of plausible deniability. Lena, who had once gushed about his easy charm and kindness, stopped answering calls. A mutual acquaintance told me she'd moved out of the city. Another said she was seeing someone else who matched her age and optimism better than the mess she had been dragged into. I could have felt pity, on the naive, on the broken, on the man who had chosen poorly. But pity is a luxury for the uninvolved. I had work to do. Business expansion meetings, interviews, and an opening to oversee. I moved through them with a new kind of lightness, the buoyancy of someone who had anticipated and outmaneuvered betrayal. My clinics were thriving. The press coverage framed me as the woman who had protected what she built, rather than as a victim of a man who tried to steal it. Weeks stretched on, and the pressure on Ethan became pressure on every brittle thing he'd relied on. His credit lines were closed. Former colleagues who had once envied his sound judgment now distanced themselves, citing professional ethics and reputational risk. He applied for adjunct positions and part-time consulting roles and was politely turned down. The once quiet slander he'd sown about me, the stories that painted me as emotionally distant and controlling, crumbled when confronted with ledgers and receipts. People began to ask questions they'd never asked when his charm smoothed their curiosity away. Then came the letter. One rainy evening, an envelope lay on my desk, its edges soft from being handled. It was Ethan's handwriting. A last-ditch effort to reconnect? Regret? I slid it open with the polite curiosity of someone reading a weather update. Soph, it read. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I made mistakes, but I never stopped caring. If you want to talk... There was a pleading in the script that tasted old and cheap. I held the paper a moment longer and then folded it into an evidence folder marked Exhibit A and slid it into the file cabinet beside the framed award for business excellence. There are letters you keep, not because they change you, but because they remind you what you overcame. A month after the hearing, the story had settled into the city's quiet gossip channels. Ethan's name was a cautionary tale. Mine became a case study in meticulous preparation and quiet force. People approached me at industry events with sympathetic smiles that were actually apologies. Amanda hugged me once when no one else was looking, her eyes wet with the realization of how thoroughly she had been misled. She said simply, "Thank you. For being strong when you didn't have to be. There's a subtle cruelty to victory when it feels inevitable. It's not loud. It's precise, like the final click of a lock." He had spent months crafting a narrative in which he was the injured party pursuing happiness, while I was the shrewish impediment. In the end, his narrative unraveled because I, and the records, refused to be rewritten. But revenge, I'd learned, is not a moment. It's a series of small, well-executed moves that leave an opponent with no room to reconstruct their falsehoods. It's the evidence you leave perfectly filed, the bank records that don't lie, the lawyer with a calm voice who knows the law like scripture, the ability to walk away into your life with a measured breath and a plan for the morning after. My life was not a triumph because he had fallen. It was a triumph because I rebuilt what mattered, my business, my integrity, and the calm certainty that I had not been defined by his choices. I still had one final loose end to tie up. The last exchange that would close the loop in a way that needed no grand spectacle, only quiet, irrevocable closure. But that's the next part of the story. The city was restless that night, a kind of low hum vibrating beneath the skyline. From my penthouse window, I could see the traffic bleeding through Manhattan like a living vein, glowing red and white in the drizzle. I stood there for a while, glass of wine in hand, reflecting on how eerily calm life had become. For months, every sound, every vibration from my phone, every whisper in the dark, had felt like the start of a battle. But now, the silence was victory itself. Ethan had gone quiet. And silence, from a man like him, was never a good sign. I expected anger, retaliation, desperation, but instead there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no attempts to twist the narrative one more time. Until one morning, a message arrived, not from him directly, but from Amanda. "Sophia, he's not doing well. Lost his teaching job. He's back at mom's. Won't talk to anyone. I think reality finally hit." Reality, I thought, has a way of doing that, like gravity after a long fall. I replied with something polite, nothing cruel. I didn't need cruelty anymore. I had moved past the desire to watch him suffer. I had already gotten what I wanted, the peace that comes when you win without screaming. That evening, I went through the last file Natalie had sent me, the finalization notice. The divorce was now official. Every clause had been signed, every loophole sealed. Ethan would walk away with nothing more than his personal belongings and a modest settlement approved by the court. My properties, my clinics, my investments, all intact, all legally protected. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had entered our marriage thinking he could outsmart me. He left it learning that intelligence and manipulation were not the same thing. Still, a part of me wanted closure, not revenge this time, just the kind that allows a wound to heal completely. So I sent him one final message. "Ethan, the papers are signed. There's nothing left to discuss. I wish you peace, but don't contact me again." He didn't reply, not that day, not the next. But a week later, a letter arrived, handwritten. No envelope this time, just folded paper dropped at the reception desk of my office. The handwriting was sloppier than before, uncertain, trembling. "Sophia, I don't know what I expected that night. Maybe I wanted control, maybe I wanted attention. I told myself you didn't love me anymore, that you cared more about work than about us. But the truth is, I stopped being worthy of your love a long time ago. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I needed to say it. I'm sorry. E." I read it twice, then once more slowly. It wasn't enough to erase the damage, but it wasn't meant to. It was a relic, a ghost of the man he could have been. I placed it in a drawer, not for nostalgia, but for documentation, the final piece of a puzzle I had already solved. By the next month, life moved forward with startling ease. My clinic chain was featured in Forbes Health, highlighting not just its success but its resilience under the leadership of Dr. Sophia Langford, a visionary who built an empire on discipline and foresight. The article never mentioned Ethan. It didn't need to. Everywhere I went, people looked at me differently now. Not with pity, but with respect. That subtle shift in tone, in the way someone says your name, was worth more than any revenge could buy. But the universe wasn't quite done with poetic justice. It came quietly, through gossip. One of my associates mentioned over lunch, "Did you hear? Ethan's been applying to smaller colleges upstate. None have accepted him yet." Word about the financial misconduct spread faster than he expected. I didn't react. I only stirred my tea, letting the sugar dissolve slowly. "And Lena?" I asked casually. She left him. Apparently, he tried to borrow money from her parents to pay legal fees. I smiled faintly. It wasn't joy, just symmetry. Life had a way of restoring balance when you stopped forcing it. A few nights later, I found myself walking along the Hudson, the city's reflection shimmering in the water. The wind was sharp, tugging at my coat, but it felt cleansing. I thought about how much had changed, how much I had changed. The woman who once stood by Ethan's side, constantly justifying his moods, his absences, his ego, she was gone. In her place stood someone who no longer apologized for her strength. The revenge, I realized, was never about destroying him. It was about reclaiming myself, piece by piece, detail by detail, until I was whole again. That night, I returned home and opened a new journal. On the first page, I wrote one line. Revenge isn't about anger, it's about clarity. Then I closed it and left it on my desk, a reminder that every ending can also be a blueprint for rebuilding. Months passed. The scandal faded into whispers, then into silence. Ethan became just another story, a cautionary tale traded among colleagues who had once envied our perfect marriage. Lena resurfaced in photos online with someone new, someone her age. Amanda and I stayed in touch occasionally, her tone softer, her words carrying genuine warmth. Sometimes she'd ask, "Do you ever think you'll forgive him?" And I'd smile, not out of bitterness, but understanding. Forgiveness isn't for him, Amanda. It's for me. And I already did, the moment I stopped caring. By the time spring returned, my world had shifted entirely. I launched another clinic in Boston, my second in 6 months, and the opening night felt different from any celebration before. The champagne tasted brighter, the applause louder, the smiles real. After the speeches and photos, I slipped out onto the terrace alone. The city below buzzed with life, headlights weaving like veins of light, the wind carrying faint laughter from the street. For the first time in years, I felt free. I took a slow breath, the skyline glittering before me like a promise. No bitterness, no pain, just a quiet, steady kind of triumph. I thought of Ethan, not with hatred, but with indifference. The man who once believed he could control every move on the board had never realized I was playing a different game entirely. And in that final moment, as I looked out at the endless city, I whispered softly to myself, a smile curving my lips. Checkmate. Then I turned, walked back inside, and closed the door behind me, for good.